In the beginning, there was no color, no sound, only the faint shimmer of will and memory wrestling within the void. Some said it was magic, others whispered it was madness, but the truth, as it always is in the age of the Imperium, was neither. It was belief given shape, and belief has teeth. The chronicles do not record his true name, only the title he bore before the long silence, Invoker. A being born of knowledge, forged in intellect, baptized in arrogance. To some, a prophet of reason. To others, a heretic of order. He came not from Terra, nor from any known world, but from a realm where the language of power was light, and thought itself could scar the sky. And when the warp trembled, when the winds of change howled through eternity, it was Tzeentch, the architect of fate, who turned his gaze upon the Invoker. The god of schemes saw a mortal who could unmake the fabric of destiny, not through faith or demon pact, but through the unyielding calculus of his own will. A mortal who sought to understand the impossible. And that was the gravest sin of all. Before we descend further into this forgotten faith, remember to join us so that our stories may never fade into silence. The first sound he heard was the wind, low, metallic, dragging dust through the bones of a forgotten manufactorum. The air tasted of rust and cinder. A shattered aquila hung above him, its twin heads corroded into a single featureless blur, wings outstretched as though still defying the gravity of despair. Beneath that sacred ruin, Invoker stirred. He did not remember how long he had lain there. The ground beneath him was a lattice of cracked ferrocrete, burned black by promethium and consecrated by blood. His robes, once woven from the radiant filaments of his craft, were now rags, heavy with ash. The sigils on his forearms flickered faintly, whispering equations to themselves like dying prayers. He rose. The motion carried the weight of 1,000 forgotten years. The horizon burned in silence. No banners, no signals, no life. Only the wind. It moved through the remains of tanks and temples, threading between the ribs of fallen titans, the corpses of gods cast in steel. He found a reflection in a broken servitor helm. The eyes were dim, hollow. A faint golden glow pulsed behind the cornea like a dying star. Still alive, he thought, though he did not know why. The thought itself felt like blasphemy. In a universe where to exist is to serve, why should he remain when empires of devotion had turned to dust? Something stirred in the wind, not sound, but intention, a vibration beneath thought, the faint rhythm of the warp bleeding through reality's cracks. He closed his eyes. He had felt this before, in the age when stars still sang and names still meant something. The presence was old, vast, playful. It did not hunger for flesh, nor command allegiance. It simply observed. Curious, he murmured, his voice hoarse and distant. The word vanished into the emptiness. He began to walk. His boots left faint marks in the dust, but the wind erased them as quickly as they formed. Each step took him deeper into the skeleton of civilization. Manufactoria halls split open like carcasses, cathedrals overturned, vox towers collapsed under the weight of silence. Inside one ruin, a broken servitor still twitched, its remaining arm endlessly etching the same sacred rune onto the wall, the sigil of the Omnisia. Each line was burned over the last, the symbol growing thicker, darker, more meaningless with repetition. The smell of oil and rot clung to the air. Invoker knelt beside it. "Why do you persist?" he whispered. The servitor's vox grill crackled, spitting static and a single phrase, repeated through centuries of degradation. Faith sustains function. He stared at the creature, half machine, half corpse, and felt the irony coil through him like a serpent.
Faith sustains function. Knowledge sustains nothing. He had once believed knowledge was salvation, that intellect could rival God's. But intellect had no cathedral. It left no relics when the fire came. He moved on, passing through the skeletal remains of a manufactorium assembly line. Machines lay dormant, their forms encrusted with time. He trailed a hand along their surfaces, feeling the cold metal whisper under his fingers. Fragments of forgotten data burst in his mind, the language of the machine spirit, now faint as dying breath. Then, from the shadowed archway beyond, a light flickered. Not the pale green of failing power cells, something deeper, unstable, pulsing with the color of thought. He followed it, cautious, his senses weaving the air for warp signatures. The light led him to a mural. It had once been painted across an entire wall, a vision of terror radiant under the emperor's gaze. Golden towers pierced clouds. Angels of the Adeptus Custodes stood guard. But time had eaten it. The paint was cracked, the colors inverted, the emperor's eyes burned black. Below the mural, someone had written in blood, "He does not speak anymore." Invoker stood before it for a long time. The air around him trembled. It was not merely the warp. It was memory itself bending under the weight of silence. He reached out, tracing the letters. Perhaps, he whispered, he never did. And somewhere, impossibly far away or impossibly near, something laughed.
It was a sound that wasn't a sound, a color that wasn't seen but remembered. The mural's surface shifted, its cracks bleeding into spirals, the golden towers twisting like serpents of glass. The laughter continued, soft and mocking, rippling through dimensions like a ripple in the ocean of time. He took a step back, his mind flared with the instinctive terror of recognition. The warp had found him. But no daemons emerged, no claws tore through reality. Instead, the light gathered into a shape, a floating sigil made of feathers and flame, spinning in midair. 1,000 eyes opened across its form, each one seeing, knowing, testing. A voice spoke, or rather, occurred inside him. A scholar of mortal reason, a collector of fragments. You smell of questions. How quaint! His heart slowed. Not from fear, but understanding. He had read of this voice, long ago, in the heretical scrolls of the Black Library. The changer of ways, the liar who tells truth by accident, the eternal paradox made flesh. "Tzeentch," he said, and the air itself trembled as if the word were blasphemy against existence. "You remember me? Few do now. Their prayers have rusted, their belief diluted. Yet you still think you can comprehend the weave?" Invoker straightened. His body ached, but his voice was steady. "Comprehension is the only defiance left to man." "Defiance? No, mortal. You are my defiance. Every question you ask feeds my wings." The sigil spun faster, its light staining the air with iridescent dread. He felt his mind pulled toward it, not by force, but by seduction. The promise of knowledge infinite, understanding unbounded, equations that could reorder galaxies. For a moment, just a moment, he almost reached out. But then he saw the mural again, the black eyes of the emperor, hollow and dead. The words written in blood, the silence of faith, and he understood. Knowledge without meaning was just another god. He turned away. "You mistake me for one of your kind."
"All who think are mine." "No," he whispered, stepping into the dust-choked wind.
All who believe are yours. I only remember." The laughter followed him into the ruins, twisting through the corridors like smoke. It was not anger. It was amusement, a cosmic curiosity awakened. Somewhere in that fractured world, beneath the dying stars, the changer of ways began to take interest. And Invoker, weary, fractured, and lost, began his long walk toward the next echo of meaning. The wind keened, the servitors prayed, and above it all, unseen wings unfolded. The warp had found its scholar. Night came not as darkness, but as distortion. The sky, a cracked dome of static and ash, flickered with faint warp light. Streaks of violet and blue rippling like wounded auroras. The manufactorum horizon shifted and folded, as though reality itself were trying to remember its shape. Invoker found shelter inside the hollowed husk of a collapsed shrine. Its icons were broken, their faces scoured clean by centuries of sand and despair. Only one remained intact, a small, unassuming figure carved in dull gold, half buried in soot. A saint, perhaps, or a machine god's fragment. It had no name. He sat beside it in silence. The air hummed faintly with the static pulse of nearby power coils, still alive after millennia. The rhythmic sound was almost human, like a fading heartbeat. He opened his hands. In his palm, threads of light flickered, fragments of his art, his once unfathomable craft. Arcane sigils flared and died, unable to find the laws that had once governed them. The warp was too close now, too saturated, too alive. Here, reason bent under the weight of prayer. He whispered an incantation, though the word felt alien on his tongue. Alacrity, ignite. The light faltered, stuttered, then vanished. For the first time in centuries, he felt small, not powerless, but irrelevant. He looked up at the saint's featureless face. "You said you were mercy," he murmured. "But mercy was for those who obeyed. The rest of us learned through ruin." The faint echo of his words died in the dust. Then, faintly, a sound. Mechanical, rhythmic. Heavy steps across the rubble. He stilled, drawing his cloak around him, eyes narrowing. It was not a servitor. Its cadence was too deliberate, too aware. Out from the shadowed colonnade came figures, 3 of them, clad in rusted red robes, their limbs fused with augmetic implants. Lenses glowed where eyes should be, and servo arms hissed from their backs like predatory serpents. The Mechanicus, or what was left of it. The lead priest's voice emerged from a chorus of vox distortion. "Identify. Unregistered soul signature detected." Invoker stood, dust falling from his shoulders. A wanderer, nothing more. The red priest tilted its head, mechanical tendrils flexing. Wanderers are anomalies. Anomalies invite correction. He raised his hand, but stopped himself. These were not enemies, not yet. "I seek information. The Imperium, its signals are gone. The stars are silent. What remains?" A flicker of static laughter. Remains? Only recursion, only process. The flesh decayed, the code endures. Their words rattled in his skull like fragments of prayer and logic intertwined. He took a careful step forward. "You serve the Omniscience still?" The lead priest's optics whirred, focusing on him. The Omnicia became entropy, Entropy became faith. We sustain function through belief. Faith sustains function. The same words the servitor had spoken. And now seeing them, these machine priests who had replaced flesh with code, whose worship was measured in the efficiency of corrosion, he understood the pattern. They were not surviving. They were repeating. Endless recursion, endless ritual. "Do you understand meaning?" he asked, almost gently.
The red priest paused, the sound of gears adjusting. Meaning is a redundancy parameter. A whisper of sadness crossed Invoker's eyes. Then you are already dead. The priest's servo arm hissed. Correction required. Energy surged. Blue arcs of plasma danced between their limbs. The air grew heavy, trembling with residual warp interference. Invoker's mind raced. He had not drawn upon his true art since the fall, not since the warp began consuming worlds whole. But now necessity demanded it. He closed his eyes. In the void of his thoughts, the patterns reawakened, luminous symbols orbiting memory, equations of control and balance. His hand rose, fingers weaving through invisible threads. The world shuddered. A sphere of incandescent energy burst from his palm, wrapping the nearest priest in a halo of blinding fire. The machine screamed, its vox emitting 1,000 overlapping prayers as it dissolved into cinders. The others recoiled, chanting bioneric canticles, their weapons flaring with corrupted code light. Invoker stepped forward, the heat from his own spell burning his robes. His voice was low, steady. "You call your decay sacred. You mistake malfunction for divinity." Bolts of plasma tore through the shrine. He deflected one with a spiral of kinetic force. Another grazed his arm, searing the flesh beneath. Pain anchored him, a reminder that he was still human, still imperfect. The second priest lunged, claws crackling with voltage. He countered, twisting his hand in a sharp gesture. The air solidified, freezing the movement mid-lunge. For a heartbeat, time itself stuttered. Then he released the field, and the priest shattered into shards of glass and metal. The last one faltered. Its voice broke, oscillating between logic and fear. "Impossible! You alter variables." Invoker approached, exhaustion gnawing at him. "I restore them." He placed his palm against the priest's metallic chest. The rune flared, not fire, but pure entropy inversion. The machine's body went still, its lenses flickering out one by one. Silence returned. Only the faint hiss of cooling metal filled the air. He sank to his knees, breath uneven. The saint statue stood beside him, watching in eternal quiet. The faint warp light outside pulsed again, brighter now, curious. He had used power born of intellect, not faith, not prayer, and the warp had noticed. In the periphery of vision, the air rippled. A feather drifted down, burning with iridescent flame. Another followed, then a dozen more. Each one whispered in a voice that was his own, but older, fractured, infinite. Defiance is faith disguised as reason. He crushed the feather in his hand. It turned to ash, vanishing before it hit the ground. Outside, thunder rolled through the void, not from storms, but from the laughter of something vast, delighted by his persistence. The changer of ways was still watching. And far above the broken manufacturum, unseen to mortal sight, the warp began to twist into a pattern, a spiral of destiny, forming around a single flicker of mortal intellect. A scholar had defied the divine, and the divine
was amused. The shrine's power coils dimmed, their last sparks dying out. Darkness folded over him once more. He looked to the lifeless saint and murmured, "If the emperor still sees, may he turn away." Then he gathered his robes and stepped once more into the storm of dust and ruin, walking toward the red horizon, where the machines whispered and faith and logic bled together like oil and blood. The wind followed, carrying faint laughter and the scent of something burning.
Dawn came not with light, but with corrosion. The sky had become a molten bruise, bleeding through layers of cloud that were more metal than vapor. The wind carried with it the scent of rust and ionized blood. Across the horizon, the skeletons of Manufactoria reached toward the heavens like penitent giants begging for absolution. Invoker moved through the graveyard of machines in silence. His wounds had scabbed, his robes torn into banners that fluttered faintly behind him. Each step sank into a carpet of blackened ash, not soil, but the remnants of cities and bodies compressed into dust. The world, whatever its name had once been, was dying not by war, but by memory. Every surface he touched hummed faintly, still carrying the echo of worship, a prayer looped into metal, the last heartbeat of the Mechanicus. He came upon a vast plain of broken conveyor lines and burnt-out manufactorum crawlers. At the center stood a monolithic structure, half cathedral, half machine. 1,000 spires stabbed the sky, their bases riddled with glowing circuitry. The sigil of the Omnisia still burned upon its gate, though time had flayed it into abstraction. As he approached, the air grew heavy, charged with the static scent of sanctity long past. He stepped through the gate. Inside, the light was crimson, filtered through stained glass depicting angels of circuitry and machine gods descending upon mortals who offered their flesh. The floor pulsed faintly beneath his boots, alive with buried conduits that still remembered their purpose. At the altar stood figures, 20 or more, their bodies fused into a single mass of flesh and iron. They swayed as one, their mouths speaking in overlapping vox tones, their faces twisted into identical expressions of devotion. Tubes and cables pierced their spines, merging them into the cathedral's nervous system. He realized, with quiet horror, that they were alive. "Praise be," one murmured, its voice leaking static. Another followed. "Entropy is the gospel. The machine remembers the soul." Invoker stood at the threshold, not daring to disturb the rhythm. The spectacle was grotesque and sacred. These were not heretics nor cultists, but remnants of a faith that had devoured its own creators. He spoke softly, reverently. "What remains of the flesh is still aware."
Dozens of eyes turned toward him in unison, glowing faint blue in the darkness. "The flesh remembers nothing," they answered together. "We are the choir of sustained function." He stepped closer. The heat of the machinery burned his skin, but he did not stop. "You chant prayers to entropy," he said, "yet entropy cannot answer." A sound escaped the choir, not laughter, but a distortion of grief. "Answering is irrelevant. Worship is function. Function is faith." Their words rippled through the cathedral. The conduits along the walls flared with pale light, responding to their rhythm. The whole structure pulsed, like a heart long after death. He gazed upon them, eyes full of both sorrow and fascination. "Once your kind built gods from logic. Now you build logic from decay." The central priest, or what might once have been one, turned its head. The movement was agonizingly slow, like a statue remembering it had joints. "Decay is revelation," it whispered. "Each flake of rust
is proof of the machine spirit's humility. You, stranger, are unregistered code. You disrupt the harmony of worship." He bowed his head slightly. Perhaps harmony is the first lie of faith. The air trembled, the choir's lenses brightened, focusing on him. Heresy detected. He raised a hand, palm open, not in defense, but in offering. "Not heresy," he said. "Observation. Your faith endures because it cannot die, but it also cannot grow." The choir tilted their heads in unison, their movements perfectly mirrored. Growth is error. Error is deletion. He sighed, a sound that carried centuries of exhaustion. Then deletion is mercy. He extended his other hand, tracing invisible lines through the air. The warp hummed faintly, responding to his will. He did not summon fire, nor storm, nor light, only stillness. For a single, perfect moment, the cathedral froze. The flickering conduits fell silent. The hum ceased. Even the light seemed to pause mid-glow. Then, like a mirror breaking, the choir began to unravel. Not in agony, but in release. Their forms dissolved into motes of dust and iron, scattering upward into the crimson light. The cathedral's pulse slowed, then stopped. The smell of ozone faded.
Only silence remained. He lowered his hand, trembling. His body shook not from exhaustion, but from the weight of what he had done. He had not destroyed them, merely ended their recursion. Mercy through stillness. He turned to leave, but a faint vibration beneath the altar stopped him. A single data spindle protruded from the base, ancient, almost fossilized. He knelt, brushing dust from its surface. A sigil glowed faintly upon it, the seal of Mars, the machine god's first tongue. He hesitated, then pressed his hand to it. A surge of memory flooded his mind, fragmented images, voices, equations. He saw worlds burning, forges consumed by warp fire, red-robed priests chanting to empty skies. He saw the fall of Mars, the breaking of the Mechanicus. And buried deep within, a single message pulsed like a heartbeat. The Omnissiah is not lost. He dreams beneath the storm. Invoker staggered back, the visions searing through him. The words felt alive like a living code implanted within his thoughts. The warp around him shimmered, hungry for meaning. He whispered the phrase aloud, and the cathedral trembled, not from power, but from recognition. Something ancient had heard. He left the cathedral behind, its lights flickering like dying stars. Outside, the horizon rippled, not with fire, but with feathers. Countless, endless feathers falling from the heavens like snow made of memory. Each one burned with the faint color of thought. He looked upward. The sky shifted, and within the storm he saw it, a vast, unseen shape moving across the fabric of reality. Wings that spanned worlds, eyes that blinked in dimensions he could not name. Tzeentch, the architect, watching, waiting, smiling. A voice, familiar yet alien, whispered in the wind. You awaken the sleepers. You speak to the dead. Are you seeking me or escaping me? He closed his eyes. Neither. I am trying to remember what it means to be. The voice laughed, soft and endless. Then you are closer than you think. And just like that, the feathers dissolved. The world was empty again. He stood alone amid the ashes of faith.
the data spindle's message still burning in his mind like a prophecy. The Omnisia dreams beneath the storm. But whose storm? The Emperor's? Or the Changer's? He did not yet know. He only knew that the path ahead now led toward the horizon's flicker, where faith, memory, and the warp converged. The horizon burned with the slow rhythm of an open wound. As Invoker crossed the plains of blackened slag, he felt the planet's hum beneath his boots, a heartbeat of rusted metal and buried machines that refused to die. The wind had changed. It no longer carried the scent of ash, but of ozone and whispers, like a cathedral breathing in its sleep. He reached a rise overlooking a valley carved into the earth like a wound. At its center sprawled a labyrinth of half-sunken forges, towers, and collapsed servitor vaults. The old manufactoria had melted into one another during the planet's last hours, forming a living grave of steel and bone. Lights flickered deep within, thousands of them, like candles burning in the lungs of a dying god. He descended. As he entered the valley, the air thickened, charged with the tang of electroplasma and the faint moan of buried engines. The sound was not mechanical alone. It was liturgical. Every piston stroke a hymn, every venting valve a sigh of devotion. He passed through corridors lined with suspended servitors. Their bodies hung from chains, each one whispering binary prayers through cracked vox grills. Their eyes were gone, replaced by glass lenses that glowed with faint blue light. They watched him without sight. A faint voice, childlike, broken, drifted from one of them. Error. Unauthorized presence, recalibration required. He paused. Who maintains you? 1,000 whispering tongues answered through the metallic air. We maintain each other. We are the cycle. The code breathes. The code remembers. He walked among them, feeling the warmth of the machine's dying faith radiate through the floor. Then you are priests now, he said softly. Priests without a god. The servitors' heads turned in eerie synchrony, as if a single will moved them. The god persists, they said. He speaks through silence. He breathes through entropy. His word is decay, and we are his choir. One of them twitched violently, its arm breaking free from its restraint. Sparks erupted from its spine. The Omnissiah sleeps beneath the storm, it gasped. The same phrase, identical tone. The same message. Invoker's heart tightened. The echo was too perfect to be coincidence. It was spreading, a signal buried in the warp, whispering through whatever fragments of machine mind still clung to this world. He raised his hand, tracing faint sigils in the air, not of power but of perception. Light flared briefly, outlining threads of energy weaving through the room. The entire vault glowed with unseen circuitry, luminous veins pulsing with a rhythm that was not human. The servitors were connected, their neural remnants woven into a massive, living network beneath the ruins. A collective consciousness, not sentient, not dead, something between.
He stepped closer to one, its flesh nearly gone. What are you becoming? The servitor's head tilted. Becoming is blasphemy. We are function sustained. He knelt, placing his palm against the servitor's chest. And yet, you change, he whispered. Even still, you change. The moment his skin met cold steel, his vision fractured. He saw, not with his eyes, but with thought. Endless corridors of light, neural pathways tangled like galaxies, all leading to a single point beneath the planet's crust. There, deep within the machinery, something stirred, something that was neither God nor ghost. A sleeping mind. Its pulse was the planet's heartbeat. Its dreams were equations too vast for language. The omniscia dreams beneath the storm. He tore his hand back, gasping, his pulse hammering in his skull. The servitors had gone silent. The entire vault now trembled faintly, as if the world itself had exhaled. He staggered backward, gripping a pillar to steady himself. "You're not worshiping. You're waiting." A whisper answered, though no mouths moved. "Waiting is worship." The warp trembled. He felt the air distort, the temperature dropping. Frost bloomed along the edges of the servitors' chains, spreading across the floor like veins of glass. The light dimmed, the hum deepened, and then the laughter returned. It was quieter this time, like a whisper shared between dimensions. So eager to define, so desperate to anchor meaning where there is none.
"Tzeentch," he hissed, his breath fogging. "Show yourself." "I already have," the voice purred. "Every pattern you trace, every truth you unveil, every formula you carve from the corpse of reality, it is my reflection. You cannot seek the divine without becoming its echo." The servitors twitched, their bodies convulsed as if caught between machine and soul. From their chests faint light began to bloom, not the soft glow of circuitry, but something iridescent and alive. Invoker stepped back. "Stop this," he growled. "They are not yours." "Not yet," said the voice, "but you made them so. You awakened the code that binds their devotion. You've opened the dream." He clenched his fists, fighting the pull of the warp gnawing at his will. "If this is a dream, then let it end." He summoned light, not fire, not power, but clarity. A sphere of brilliance flared from his chest, driving the shadows back. For a heartbeat, the laughter faltered. The servitors fell still, their lights flickering out one by one. The silence that followed was absolute. But he knew, as surely as the stars once sang, that this was not victory. It was attention. He had drawn the gaze of something far older, far more curious than any god of man. When the light faded, only echoes remained. The servitors hung lifeless again, their prayers reduced to faint static whispers. He stood in the cold and whispered to the empty air. "If knowledge feeds the warp, then every thought is a weapon. And every weapon becomes its master," came the reply, not from without, but within. He looked down at his hands, trembling. Threads of blue flame flickered across his skin. Tzeentch's mark, faint, forming where faith and defiance collided.
He closed his fists, extinguishing them by will alone. "Not yet," he said. And somewhere in the dark beneath the forge world, the dreaming machine stirred, as though answering his denial with a heartbeat of its own. He turned toward the horizon. There, beyond the shattered spires, he could see the first shimmer of movement, banners of the Astra Militarum, ragged and aflame, locked in war against something unseen. Humanity still fought, and a faith had devoured the Mechanicus. Perhaps war had devoured the rest. He began to walk toward the fire, toward the next wound. The plain was aflame. Smoke rose like sermons toward the bleeding sky, and every echo of gunfire sounded like prayer. From the cliffs above, Invoker beheld a battlefield drowning in chaos, banners torn, trenches filled with metal and mud, men reduced to silhouettes against the light of Prometheum fires. The Astra Militarum still fought here, the tattered remnants of regiments, once proud enough to shout the Emperor's name into the jaws of oblivion. Now they moved without rhythm, without command, ghosts fighting to remember why they still lived.
The air stank of blood, oil, and ozone. In the distance, he saw shapes moving, metallic, animal, almost fluid. The enemy. Not orcs, nor chaos marines, nor the undead legions of Necrons. Something new, something born of the warp's imagination. Their forms shifted with every blink, sometimes armored like custodes, sometimes formless like smoke, sometimes radiant like angels sculpted from glass. They carried no weapons, only the air around them burned. Warp entities, mimics of human memory.
Invoker descended from the ridge, the heat washing over him. A shell exploded nearby, showering him in ash. He did not flinch. He had seen empires fall with less noise. At the base of the hill, a squad of guardsmen were gathered behind a collapsed chimera. Their eyes widened as he approached. A lone figure, draped in torn robes, walking through flame as if it were mist. "Hold fire!" one barked through his vox mask. "Identify yourself!" "An echo," Invoker said. His voice carried through the storm like an ancient wind. "And a witness." The sergeant stepped forward, lasgun trained. "You're no preacher, no soldier. You glow like the damned. Speak your purpose." He looked past them, toward the lines of war where men screamed prayers into the dust. "Purpose," he said softly. "That word has lost its God." The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. One, trembling, crossed himself with soot-stained fingers. "You one of them?" he asked. Invoker's eyes, dim gold beneath his hood, met his. "No, but I remember what they were." Before they could question further, a tremor split the air. The ground rippled, reality bending like glass under heat. The nearest guardsman screamed as his body dissolved into light, reshaping into a mockery of himself, eyes burning with warp fire. "Contact!" the sergeant shouted. Bolts of lasfire lanced the air. The phantoms emerged, human-shaped but wrong, their faces flickering like broken holograms. Each step they took left ripples in the fabric of the world. Invoker stepped forward, his robe swirling like smoke. "Fall back," he said. "These things do not die by matter." The sergeant spat, firing again. "Then how?" "By memory." He raised his hand. The air thickened, a vibration of raw thought, humming like a forgotten choir. Runes flared around his fingers, golden and violet, forming an array older than this war, older than the Imperium. The nearest phantom lunged, a soldier-shaped flame, its face weeping light. Invoker's spell met it mid-leap. For a heartbeat, silence. Then the creature shattered, scattering into shards of color that evaporated into nothing. The soldiers froze. He turned his head slightly, voice calm amid the carnage. "Do not look upon them as enemies. They are reflections. Strike without thought, and you will only feed them." Another wave surged forward. The men obeyed instinct, firing, shouting, praying. The phantoms twisted, feeding on the noise, growing brighter, stronger. Invoker's voice cut through the chaos. Silence. And somehow, impossibly, they obeyed. He closed his eyes. The wind slowed. The battlefield seemed to hold its breath. From his palms, light began to rise. Not the clean brilliance of fire, but the molten glow of knowledge made manifest. He spoke not in words, but in equations, his voice trembling with the weight of meaning. Energy to understanding, understanding to stillness, stillness to nothing. The light spread outward in concentric ripples. Wherever it touched, the phantoms flickered, confused, their forms unraveling as if memory itself had abandoned them.
One by one, they vanished. The silence that followed was immense. The only sound was the crackle of distant fires and the slow breathing of the survivors. The sergeant lowered his gun. What are you?" Invoker turned his gaze to the horizon. The sky had turned purple, veins of warp light spreading across it like fractures in glass. He said quietly, "I was a man who believed in reason. Now I am learning what faith costs."
The sergeant stepped closer, eyes hollow behind his mask. "Then teach us, because whatever gods are left, they've stopped listening." Invoker's expression softened, almost pity. "If the gods are silent, then perhaps it is time man learned to speak his own truth." The soldiers stared at him, uncertain whether to fear or follow. He gestured to the dead around them. "Bury them with no creed," he said. "Their sacrifice belongs to no god, only to memory." The sergeant hesitated, then nodded. "As you say, stranger." As they began their grim work, Invoker turned away, his mind heavy. The warp still shimmered faintly above the battlefield, pulsing in rhythm with his own heartbeat. Each spell he cast, each truth he dared to speak, it drew him closer. The fabric between knowledge and faith was thinning. He looked up once more at the sky, where the storm of color writhed like a wound. Somewhere within that chaos, he felt it again. Amusement, ancient and knowing. "You wield understanding as a weapon, little scholar. How very human of you." "Tzeentch," he whispered. "Names are only shapes. You, of all creatures, should know that." The voice faded, leaving only the crackle of war behind. He looked at his hands, faintly glowing from the residue of his craft. They trembled, not with fear, but with exhaustion. Each act of defiance left a scar upon his soul. The soldiers' prayers behind him grew faint, their words bleeding in to static. And in that twilight between battle and silence, he realized the war outside mirrored the war within. Reason and faith were no longer enemies. They were reflections of the same hunger.
To believe, even when the universe refused to make sense. He closed his eyes, the fire around him whispered, and from somewhere deep in the warp, the laughter of the architect echoed like prophecy. When night fell, it brought no peace, only the aftertaste of war. The smoke from the battlefield drifted across the plains, dimming the stars until the sky resembled a vast, burned-out cathedral. The wind carried the scent of burnt oil, blood, and ozone, the incense of the dying Imperium. Invoker sat alone upon the hull of a ruined tank. Its metal still radiated faint warmth, as though remembering the life it once carried. The soldiers he had saved rested in the valley below, building fires among the corpses. The flicker of their flames was the only proof that man still resisted oblivion. He looked down at his hands. The faint glow from his skin had not faded. Every motion sent threads of light spiraling into the air, uncontrolled, hungry. His art had always been precise once, but now it drank from something larger. The warp itself seemed to echo his intent, responding not as servant, but as reflection. He murmured to the night, "I used to command the elements. Now they listen." The silence answered him, deep, breathing, almost alive. The warp's boundary was thin here, stretched taut like the skin of a drum. Beyond it,
Thought itself took form, and gods leaned close to hear what mortals dared to whisper. He felt that presence again, a ripple of amusement, the smell of copper and ozone. "You are learning, little conjurer." "I am remembering. There is a difference." "Semantics. Meaning is only control with feathers. And you, of all mortals, crave control, even when you call it wisdom." He closed his eyes. "If wisdom has no control, then it is madness." "Perhaps, but tell me." The air trembled as the voice leaned inward, close enough to hear the dust around him. "Was it wisdom that made you save those soldiers today, or guilt that your knowledge could not save their world?" He did not answer. The question struck too deep.
The laughter returned, soft, omnidirectional, eternal. It was not cruel. It was delighted. The way a sculptor delights in the fracture of marble that reveals something unexpected. He stood, turning his gaze toward the flickering lights of the encampment below. The soldiers' songs carried faintly through the wind, old Terran hymns about home, sung by broken voices that no longer believed in what they praised. Faith as habit, hope as noise. He descended. At the edge of the camp, a young soldier looked up as he approached, his face pale beneath grime, his las rifle shaking slightly in his hands. "You shouldn't walk alone, sir. The shadows move here." "The shadows always move," Invoker replied. "It is the stillness you should fear." The boy frowned. "Stillness?" "When the world stops changing, it dies." He left the boy with that and walked on, past the fires where wounded men lay on makeshift beds of plasteel and prayer. A Medicaid servitor hissed quietly, its arm stitching wounds with trembling precision. It sang a fractured lullaby and binaric code, its tone oddly gentle. A priest knelt nearby, whispering the litanies of endurance over the dying. His armor bore the scars of melted faith. His eyes were dim, not blind, but emptied of certainty. When Invoker passed, the priest stopped his prayers and stared. "You," he said softly, his voice cracking like parchment. "I saw what you did, the fire that obeyed no creed. What are you?" "A remnant." The priest's lips trembled. "If you have power, use it. End their suffering. The Emperor teaches mercy." "The Emperor," Invoker interrupted gently, "teaches endurance. Mercy was always mankind's invention." The priest's eyes filled with tears, not from sorrow, but from the collapse of conviction. "Then why endure at all?"
Invoker crouched beside him, his gaze steady. "Because endurance is how we remember. The universe forgets us the moment we stop moving." The priest stared at him for a long time. Then he bowed his head and whispered, "Then let movement be our prayer." Invoker stood again, silent. The words echoed in his mind, reshaping themselves into something ancient, something dangerous. Movement as prayer, change as devotion. Tzeentch's laughter rippled faintly through the warp. "You see, even your truths feed me." He ignored it, though the sound lingered like perfume. Hours passed. The fires dimmed. The camp settled into uneasy rest. Invoker walked beyond the perimeter to where the bodies of the fallen lay untouched. The warp shimmered faintly around them, distorting the air. He could feel it.
souls not yet gone, trapped in a cycle between thought and oblivion. He knelt among them. "Sleep," he whispered. "You have done enough." But the dead did not sleep. Their memories twined through the warp, their last prayers bleeding into its storm. And in that moment, he understood. The warp was not only the sea of gods, it was the graveyard of humanity's thoughts. Every fear, every plea, every whisper of love or guilt, drifting eternally. And it was alive. He closed his eyes. For the briefest instant, he felt everything. The dreams of soldiers, the prayers of dying planets, the silent longing of worlds already gone. All of it singing one endless chorus. "We remember." He gasped, breaking contact. His body trembled, sweat cold on his skin. He looked to the horizon. There, faintly glowing through the smoke, was something enormous. A structure, pulsing with unnatural light. Not a fortress, not a temple, something between both. A place of gathering.
And deep within his mind, a whisper returned, softer than thought. The Omnisia dreams beneath the storm. He rose, his eyes burning with new purpose. If the Mechanicus prayed to silence, if the soldiers fought for memory, then perhaps this structure, whatever it was, held the truth of both, the dream beneath the storm. He turned toward it. The wind caught his cloak, carrying ash like snow around him. Behind him, the soldiers slept uneasily. Ahead, the sky pulsed like a wound about to open. And for the first time since awakening, Invoker felt not despair, but direction. The fire in his veins no longer burned from defiance. It burned from something dangerously close to faith. He began to walk. Each step echoed through the ruin like a heartbeat in the chest of a dead god. The warp stirred, smiling. The path to the structure was long and silent, carved through the skeleton of a world that had forgotten its own language. The air shimmered faintly with warp residue. Each breath carried the taste of ozone and old metal, like breathing through the lungs of a dying machine. Invoker walked without rest. The closer he drew to the light on the horizon, the less real the ground beneath him seemed. The landscape shifted when he wasn't looking. Manufactoria turning into cathedrals, cathedrals bleeding into deserts of glass. The world folded and unfolded with every step, as though reality itself could not decide what story to tell. He knew this feeling. He had crossed realms of magic before, worlds where willpower sculpted matter. But this was different. Here, thought was not power. Thought was currency. Each idea had weight, each emotion gravity. And in this place, he was bankrupt. He descended into a valley of light. The sky bent downward like the inside of an eye, its clouds feathered with luminous blues and purples. At the valley's center stood the structure, a tower without base or summit, spiraling into the heavens like a column of molten glass. Within it, shapes moved. Too many eyes, too many wings. He whispered, almost reverently, "So this is your heart." The air quivered. "Not mine," came the reply. The voice was no longer disembodied. It came from everywhere at once, vibrating through the bones of the earth. "You walk through a dream not of my making. It was built from yours." He clenched his fists. "You speak in riddles, Damon." "Do I?" The sky rippled. Shapes began to form within the light, human shapes, vast and radiant, each one a fragment of his own memory. One wore his face, but older.
Another was his childhood self, still clutching a book of spells. A third bore the features of a woman he had once loved and buried beneath ambition. Every question you asked became a feather in my wings. Every truth you refused to believe, a step toward my throne. You thought knowledge made you free, but knowledge is the only cage you ever built for yourself. He stepped forward, defiant though the light scorched his skin. If I am your creation, then you are a god built by man's curiosity, nothing more than a reflection of our fear of not knowing. 1,000 voices answered him at once, rising and falling like the tide. And yet you still seek me. He could not deny it. Beneath his rage was fascination, not worship, but recognition. The architect was everything he had chased and denied in equal measure, chaos disguised as enlightenment, freedom masquerading as truth. He took another step. The ground beneath him shifted to mirrors. Each reflection showed a different world, one where the Imperium had never fallen, another where mankind had never reached the stars, another still where he himself had become the Emperor's chosen prophet. Each vision whispered in the language of possibility. He shut his eyes. You tempt me with mirrors.
I offer you memory, Tzeentch replied. Do not confuse reflection with deception. Both are truths viewed from different angles. The mirrors broke. The tower pulsed, light cascading down its spiraling sides like the breath of a god. The ground split open, revealing stairs of glass leading downward into an endless chamber. He descended. At first, there was nothing, only darkness humming like a low hymn. Then came the sound of feathers, millions of them rustling, folding, unfolding. The air smelled of parchment, ink, and smoke. He emerged into a hall that defied sense, a library of living light, its walls made of thought. Books floated in midair, their pages turning themselves, each one whispering fragments of histories, both real and imagined. In the distance, thrones floated in a slow orbit, each occupied by figures of impossible beauty, winged scholars made of starlight and fire. And on the far side of the hall, upon a dais of molten color, sat it, the architect of fate. Tzeentch did not have one form. Its presence shifted with every blink. One moment, a cloaked sage with eyes like galaxies. The next, a bird of endless wings. The next, a face formed entirely of other faces, smiling and weeping in the same breath. You sought knowledge, the god said softly, and now you stand within its heart. Invoker stared. Knowledge without truth is just noise. Then what is truth? He hesitated. That which endures. Endures? Tzeentch laughed, and the sound shattered every book in the room, scattering them like feathers. Nothing endures. Not gods, not men, not even meaning. Existence is a question that answers itself through change. The words struck him like thunder. He staggered, clutching his chest. Then why speak at all? Why make anything if all must break?
Because even breaking is creation. The light dimmed. Feathers rained from the ceiling, each one glowing with fragments of memory. Within them, he saw every civilization that had ever risen and fallen, all the wars,
all the prayers, all the unending hunger to understand. And in every image he saw himself, the scholar, the heretic, the wanderer who would not kneel. Tzeentch rose. Do you see now why I find you beautiful, mortal? You are me, in miniature, a god without eternity. He shook his head, trembling. If I am you, then why do I still suffer? Because you have not yet learned to worship your own becoming. For the first time, Invoker felt fear, not of death, but of the truth in the god's words. The hall began to unravel. The books burned into light. The thrones fell away. Only he and the god remained, standing amid an ocean of feathers, burning softly like dying suns. Tzeentch extended a hand, talons made of color and flame. Accept it, the god whispered. Become the question instead of the answer. He looked at the hand, and for one unbearable instant, he wanted to. He wanted to understand everything, to stop being human, to become meaning itself. But then, memory. The soldiers, the priest, the servitors chanting in the dark, all of them believing, not knowing. Their prayers had built empires. Their ignorance had kept them human. He met the god's gaze. No. Tzeentch tilted its many heads. No? I will not become your mirror. Silence. Then laughter. Then you already are. The hall exploded into light. He fell through time, through memory, through faith. The last thing he saw before the world inverted was a single feather drifting toward him, glowing with impossible color. When it touched his palm, the dream shattered. He awoke on his knees, breathing fire. The ground beneath him was neither stone nor metal, but something between, a living mosaic of shifting color, pulsing like the veins of a creature dreaming in eternity. The tower was gone. The sky was gone. There was only horizon, infinite, circular, luminous, the inside of the architect's mind. Every direction sang, not with sound, but with knowing, words without tongues, visions without sight. He could feel each one clawing gently at the edges of his sanity, offering him names for things no mortal should name. He rose slowly, his body trembling, his robes damp with blood, though he could not tell if it was his. The feather still rested in his palm, flickering like a dying star. It pulsed once, twice, then unfolded into light, revealing a path of suspended glass bridges stretching into the void. Beyond them, a figure stood. For a moment, he thought it was the god again, but no, the form was smaller, more human, draped in a cloak of pale feathers that shimmered with fractal light. A mask concealed its face, avian, expressionless. It spoke without opening its mouth. You refused his hand. Few ever do. Invoker steadied himself. And yet I still stand.
Standing is not victory, scholar. It is persistence. You cannot deny what you are. I am not his. A contradiction, the figure replied. You carry his light even as you curse it. Do you think defiance makes you free? He stepped forward. Freedom is a wound we choose to keep open. The masked figure tilted its head. Then bleed, little godling. The bridges trembled. Around him the void rippled, and from it emerged forms like angels and equations entwined. Each one wore his face. Each one whispered truths he had buried. You believed knowledge would save you. You condemned faith as ignorance. You built a universe that worshipped understanding, and still you prayed to be seen. Their words wrapped around him like chains of light. He staggered backward, the sound of their chorus piercing through his mind like a litany of accusation. He shouted, "Silence!" The light shattered. When it faded, the figure in feathers stood closer, now inches away. Behind the mask, eyes burned with the same hue as the warp itself. "You have seen what few have," it said softly. "You have looked into the architect's heart and survived. Do you know what that makes you?" He met its gaze. "A witness." The figure smiled beneath the mask, not kind, not cruel, simply inevitable. "No, Invoker, it makes you an answer." The bridges collapsed beneath them, but they did not fall. They stood in air itself, as if reality had been replaced by the memory of gravity. When mortals refuse gods, they do not end their worship, they inherit it. The architect has no interest in your submission now. He has found his reflection in you, the god who remembers he was once a man. He wanted to deny it, to scream that he was no divine thing, no avatar of chaos. But even as he drew breath, the light around him pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. He looked down at his hands. Veins of color ran beneath his skin, blue, violet, gold. The warp had touched him too deeply.
And yet, he felt no corruption, no madness, only clarity. The figure saw it too. It stepped closer, voice now a whisper. "He cannot unmake you now. You are a variable he did not plan, a self-aware pattern, the first truth that will not fold." Then why am I still here? Because answers cannot die in the realm of questions. The light dimmed. The figure raised its hand, and for a moment its feathers fell away, revealing not flesh, but mirror. In that reflection he saw himself, human, trembling, eyes filled with exhaustion and defiance. "Go," the figure said. "The storm will wake soon. The dream will collapse. If you remain, you will forget what you are." He nodded, though he did not yet understand. "And you?" "I am not." The figure dissolved into a flurry of light and wings, each feather ascending like a thought returning to its source. The bridges reformed beneath him, leading toward a single doorway suspended in the air, a gate of fractured glass beyond which lay shadow and stars. He walked toward it, the echoes of the architect's laughter following him like distant thunder. Each step felt heavier, as though he were carrying not just his body, but the memory of the god itself. When he reached the gate, he turned once more to look behind him, and saw the realm folding in on itself.
Towers of light collapsed, oceans of knowledge drained into a silence. The library of thought burned itself into unbeing. And through it all, a single voice lingered, no longer mocking, but solemn. Even rejection is devotion, scholar. You will return to me, not as servant, as understanding. He stepped through the gate. Reality screamed.
The sensation was like drowning in light, then in darkness, then in both. Time fractured, space buckled. His body scattered into fragments of thought before reassembling in a gasp. He was back. The Manufactorum sky stretched above him once more, a swirl of red and violet clouds. The storms raged on the horizon. But something had changed. The world felt smaller, his senses sharper. Every sound, every breath of dust, every spark of static carried meaning, hidden equations written beneath existence itself. He was no longer merely in the universe, he was reading it. And somewhere deep in the warp, beyond the reach of speech or sight, the changer of ways whispered with something almost like pride. My favorite mistake. Invoker fell to his knees. The feather, now darkened and still, lay in his hand. He could not tell if it was gift or curse, only that it was his. He closed his fist. The horizon glowed like dawn. He began to walk again, toward whatever storm awaited. The storm had grown teeth. Lightning cracked across the sky and colors no spectrum could name. Not white, not blue, but the ache between them. The world trembled beneath the weight of its own heartbeat. Mountains folded like paper, the air hummed with the song of something vast waking from its dream. Invoker walked through the tempest with the steadiness of one who had long since stopped expecting mercy. His robes were torn to ribbons, his skin mapped with faint veins of light, as if the warp itself had left fingerprints upon him. Everywhere he passed, machines stirred, dead Vox towers flickering back to life, servitors twitching in their tombs, engines groaning as if remembering how to breathe. The world was awakening, but not to life, to remembrance. He reached the ruins of a spire that had once been a communications bastion. Now it was half submerged in ash, its antennae bent toward the heavens like supplicants. Beneath its shadow stood the soldiers, the same survivors from the battlefield, their faces pale with exhaustion and awe. The sergeant approached him slowly, as one might approach a saint or a ghost. "It's happening again," he said. "The sky's gone wrong. The air's whispering." Invoker looked up. The clouds were not clouds anymore. They were wings. Enormous, translucent, stretching from horizon to horizon, beating in slow, impossible rhythm. Between them shimmered eyes the size of cities. The architect was watching. "I told you," Invoker said quietly, "the storm was not weather." One of the younger soldiers fell to his knees, clutching his head. "They're speaking! I can hear my mother's voice!" The sergeant tried to steady him, but his own hands shook. "What do we do?" Invoker stepped forward, feeling the warp press against his mind like a tide. "You hold on. To memory, to pain, to anything that is yours." The sergeant frowned. "And you?" "I'll speak back." He ascended the ruined spire. The wind tore at him, howling with the laughter of eternity. When he reached the summit, he spread his arms and shouted into the storm, his voice tearing against the wind. "I am not your mirror." The sky split open. From the rift descended light, radiant and sickening. It moved like liquid thought, coalescing into a shape that could not be named. Faces turned and merged within it, a god sculpted from meaning itself. Tzeentch had come. "You defy inevitability," the god whispered, though every syllable felt like a blade sliding through time. "Even now, you speak as if your words can wound me." Invoker's voice was hoarse yet steady. "I've seen your heart. It beats only when we believe it does." The god's laughter filled the storm, shaking the ruins below. "And still you stand beneath it, mortal. Still you answer the call. Do you not see? You are the worship you despise. Then let my worship burn you." He closed his eyes. Every lesson, every memory, every shard of the architect's dreams still burned within him. He drew them together, not as spell, not as weapon, but as remembrance. The sigils carved themselves into the air, orbiting him in golden fire. The storm shuddered. The god's wings darkened. "What are you doing?" "What I was made to do, to think." He reached into the warp, not to command it, but to understand it. The currents twisted around him, screaming in voices that were once human, once divine. He felt the weight of every soul, every prayer, every unanswered plea. And for the first time, he saw the truth. The warp was not evil. It was memory. A graveyard of meaning, fed by the echoes of all who had ever sought purpose. And Tzeentch, the changer, was not its ruler. He was its dream.
"Your existence," Invoker whispered, "depends on questions that must never find answers." The god flinched, not in pain, but in recognition. "Do not pretend you are free of that hunger, little reflection." "I am not," he said, "but I am willing to end it." He opened his hands. The light between them became unbearable, not bright, but true. It was the color of understanding, the glow of knowledge that refused to bow. It seared through the storm, unraveling the wings, the eyes, the endless shifting faces. Tzeentch screamed, a sound that split dimensions, a hymn of rage and awe. "You cannot erase me. I am the question that births the cosmos." Invoker's eyes blazed. "Then let the cosmos rest." The light consumed everything. The soldiers below fell to the ground, covering their eyes as the sky turned white. The storm screamed, the earth fractured. The sound was neither victory nor defeat, it was release. When the light faded, the sky was clear. No wings, no laughter, only silence, vast, peaceful, and final. The soldiers looked around in disbelief. The sergeant whispered, "Is it over?" But Invoker did not answer. He still stood upon the spire, his body still and upright. His eyes glowed faintly, their gold dimming to amber. In his hand the darkened feather turned to ash, carried away by the wind. He exhaled slowly, a sound somewhere between relief and prayer. "He's gone." The sergeant called up to him. "And you? Are you still with us?"
He looked at his hands, then at the sky that no longer trembled. "I don't know." He descended, step by slow step, his every motion echoing through the empty silence of a world that no longer dreamed. When he reached the ground, the soldiers bowed their heads, not in worship, but in recognition. Something in them understood. A god had fallen, and in its place, a man had stood long enough to remember what it meant to be human. He walked past them toward the horizon, where dawn began to bleed across the ash. For the first time, the light did not hurt. It was soft, uncertain, mortal. He smiled. The wind shifted. Somewhere, far beyond stars and void, something stirred, a ripple across the warp, faint but unignorable, the echo of a question still unanswered.
When knowledge dies, what becomes of belief? The universe did not respond. But within that silence, the light that never was continued to burn, not as fire, not as faith, but as memory.